This is our FPV drone, and we are about to attempt towing this RC glider vertically. After that, we're going to find out how much weight a 5-inch FPV drone can actually lift, while almost losing a drone in the process.
This is our E-flite Conscendo Evolution.
And this is my 5-inch FPV drone.
Here's how we're gonna pull off this FPV glider tow. The inside of the Conscendo is super cramped, so we needed a release that was lightweight, reliable, and didn't take up much space. I found a design on Thingiverse, modified it to fit the Conscendo, and 3D printed the final version. Basically, this metal pin takes all of the load instead of the servo itself, so even this tiny little servo can release the glider under full tension without stripping gears. To actually attach the glider to the drone, I designed this custom 3D printed mount for the bottom of our 5-inch quad. The important part is that the tow line runs directly through the drone's center of gravity, because otherwise, the glider would basically just tip the drone over in midair. With the tow line set up and ready to go, it was time to put the drone's actual pulling power to the test. Our original plan was to just do a quick hover test in the backyard and see if the drone could handle lifting the glider. But with Isaac keeping the drone and glider aloft at only 50% throttle and the weather cooperating, we couldn't help but try fully testing the release system too. Isaac brought the glider up to altitude, and I flipped the switch. The release worked perfectly, but then things took a turn for the worse. Because Isaac was filming with an action camera on his head, he was flying line of sight and his FPV goggles were sitting on a bench nearby. So the second the glider released, the drone suddenly lost like 2 pounds of payload and launched itself into the sky. By the time Asen grabbed the goggles and handed them over, the drone was so high up and drifted so far away that the FPV video started freezing and cutting out. And at the same time, the fishing line snapped upwards after the release and wrapped itself around one of the motors. Somehow the motor didn't lock up and Isaac was still able to get the drone back and land safely. At this point, we had officially proven that the vertical glider tow actually worked. But while we were testing, we realized something else. This 5-inch FPV drone was lifting the glider way easier than we expected. So before bringing the vertical glider tow setup to our local flying event, we wanted to figure out one thing. How much weight can a 5-inch FPV drone actually lift? We felt confident starting the weight test at 2.5 pounds since the drone was already lifting the 2-pound Conscendo comfortably. With it lifting 2.5 pounds easily, we decided to jump to 5 pounds. Still, no problems. At this point, things were already getting a little ridiculous. The drone itself only weighs about 1.5 pounds, but it was already lifting several times its own weight. So naturally, we kept going. At 7.5 pounds, the challenge wasn't really generating enough thrust anymore. It was controlling the weight. Every time the drone lifted off, the weights would start swinging underneath it like a giant pendulum. And while the motors had just enough power to keep everything in the air, the flight controller was working overtime trying to keep the drone stable. The heavier the payload got, the harder it became to stop the swinging once it started. So we decided to try one final weight, 10 pounds. The drone had just enough power to almost get it off the ground, but not quite enough to fly it. So the final number was about 7.78 pounds, nearly 6 times the weight of the drone itself. And with our completely unnecessary lifting experiment finished, it was finally time to bring the vertical glider tow to our local flying field. After all our backyard testing, we were feeling pretty confident. But that confidence lasted about 30 seconds. On our first attempt, the fishing line snagged on the model table and snapped, foiling our first launch attempt. And somehow, despite already learning this lesson once, the line managed to wrap itself around one of the motors again. So with an audience now watching our experiment fail in real time, it was back to the drawing board. The biggest problem was the fishing line itself. It was light, stretchy, and tended to go wherever it wanted after the release. So we replaced it with paracord and added small carabiners on both ends to keep the line under control and away from the props. With the new tow line ready, we set the glider flat on the table and tried again. And this time, everything went correctly. The drone pulled the glider off the table relatively smoothly, and Isaac piloted the drone and Conscendo to altitude. The release went perfectly, and we finally provided some interesting entertainment for the spectators and pilots. This was our smoothest FPV glider tow yet. And since it worked, the only logical thing to do next was try it again. For our next tow, we positioned the glider vertically on the table so it could leave cleanly without dragging the tail. Since I wanted to get some video of the launch and glider release, I handed the remote over to our friend Tyler and gave him a quick lesson on how to not destroy our airplane. Thankfully, he absolutely nailed it. The tow, release, and transition to flight were the smoothest we could have hoped for. At that point, some of the other pilots at the field were getting interested. One pilot actually asked if we could tow up his 2-meter glider since other launch methods were a lot of work to set up. Apparently, our ridiculous idea was starting to look practical. After all the fun with the vertical glider tow, we figured we'd try one more thing. We stood the Conscendo straight up on the table, throttled up the motor, and took off vertically, which somehow worked way better than it should have. But then I had another idea. The Conscendo is rated for forest power, so naturally I wanted to see what that was like. It was awesome for all of a minute, when during a full throttle loop, the elevator servo experienced enough blowback that I couldn't pull out. The glider hit the ground at over 60 miles an hour, nearly flat and level. And honestly, if I'd had about 4 more feet of altitude, I probably would have gotten away with it. The carbon spar snapped and the wings took some damage, officially ending the Conscendo's day of flying. But considering we successfully towed a glider vertically with an FPV drone twice, I'd call that a pretty fair trade. And with a little repair work, the Conscendo will be back in the air in no time.